Coming up, Debbie thinks she's funny.
Nobody knew anything about concrete, and so
I'd almost argue they still don't.
Andrew tells Debbie not to sign.
don't sign the bloody contract.
Yes.
And Debbie defends her decision to open an OnlyFans account.
You know, I said to her, well, if that's what you think I'm doing, you're so misinformed. Okay, welcome Andrew to the Builder's Crack. So I should have waited until you were actually seated before I told you the new name of the podcast, but
I think it's a great name.
and I love what you came up with the Irish spelling of it as well, meaning that, you know, it's just a little bit of fun, you know, have a good time, but also raising the issues and you know, problems that are happening out there and finding solutions more than anything. That's what I'm all about, is about solution. But before we get into all that hardcore stuff, tell me a little bit about yourself, Andrew.
Okay, I was born and bred in Perth, grew up in Como. I got interested in the building industry through engineering. So I've got a civil engineering degree. I studied at Curtin, or the WA Institute of Technology as it was back in the day.
It's going back a while now.
Absolutely.
Won't give away your age, but yeah, that's...
No. And yeah, from that, when I graduated, I had the choice between going into multi-storey construction or designing traffic roundabouts at shopping centres.
And you did a little bit of that in Melbourne, didn't you? I think I read.
Yeah.
A bit of over east.
Absolutely, yeah. So I joined civil and civic straight from university, went into multi-storey, built a couple of multi-storeys in Perth, St George's Terrace and Mill Street in Perth. Then went to Melbourne, worked on two big shopping centres, Greensborough and Knox City. Knox City was involved putting a fourth story on the existing trading Myers building at the same time as it was trading. Yep. So some nice challenging work. And then came back to Perth, did a short stint with Multiplex, and then got into the metals side, metal manufacturing, going to work for the Roofmart Group.
Okay.
And the Roofmart Group at the time had an industrial shed company, so I took over the management of that. Within 12 months, we worked out that that company was Roofmart's biggest customer, but it was precluding 5 other opposition companies from actually buying from Roofmart. So we decided to sell that business off. Mm-hmm. And then coincidentally at the same time, they'd bought a mesh machine for reinforcing for concrete.
Okay.
And nobody knew anything about concrete. And so...
I'd almost argue they still don't.
True.
But again, another topic.
so then they said, Andrew, like I'd done myself out of a job basically. I'd packed this branch of the company up and we'd sold it. And I was looking for a new challenge, and they said, well, we're selling mesh, but nobody knows anything about it. The reps don't know anything about it. Do you want to be involved? And so I said, fine. And at the time, they had no reinforcing bar. So they had mesh, but even for the house pads, you know, you need to starter bars, you need re-entrant bars. You just need some simple bar to start with.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I developed that business. Yeah, we were doing 75,000 a month in mesh and 0 in bar when we started. I developed it up to 400,000 a month in mesh and 100,000 a month in bar.
Wow.
And then decided to look for another challenge. So I got my builder's registration, decided to go out in partnership with one of my customers from Roofmart to form a building company. Mm-hmm. On the day I resigned, he pulled the pin and said, no, I don't want to be a part of a partnership.
Oh.
So I decided rather than walking back in the door of Roofmart, they would have had me back But I went on and so I established Destiny Homes by myself.
Okay.
Built about 35 homes over the course of the next 5 years. Got cleaned up by a rather nasty customer at the end. We were doing a cost plus job for an overseas client. Yep. The client, because they were living overseas, their interests were being represented by a local architect, and we'd put together a budget that the client had accepted. But when it came to actually the nitty-gritties of, for example, the toilet suites, the architect said, well, what have you chosen? And we said, well, these ones are $200. And he said, no, have you seen this guy's house in Singapore? No, choose the $900 ones.
Yeah.
So then the cost blew out.
Yeah.
And then the owners said they weren't going to pay the last $160,000.
Ouch.
In 1999 it was.
Okay. This was actually a topic that I was talking with Troy from Bellagio Homes about as well. And, again, it's just a can of worms that we just keep opening up. You start going down one rabbit hole and it's forever. But he was talking a lot about that. One of their biggest problems is, the homeowner gets the architect to do a drawing, and then when it's taken to the builder, the specs and everything change, and the goalposts changed and everything like that. So you found it with that particular job. Was that exactly that? Was it?
It was exactly that. The client in the end was happy with the home. He just wasn't happy paying the price, and he didn't realise. We'd had all the variations approved by the architect, but not by the client. I had judgment against him in Supreme Court within 6 weeks. Wow. But then he wanted to appeal it. Yeah. And your creditors aren't interested in the long-term view of appeals and court processes, and it could be 2 years to resolve all this. They wanted payment, and when they had personal guarantees, they were prepared to put in legal arguments on me personally. So in the end I had to pack the company up, hand back my registration on the company, keep my personal registration, and take on debt to finalise the whole thing.
Thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing that, because I think it's important for homeowners to know that builders have their struggles too. And although you're not building currently, you're not a builder now, you've gone on to other things and better things, it's still a struggle. And, you talk about going to Supreme Court, you talk about going to court, even if we talk about going building commission, SAT and all that, once it starts moving down that line, there's really no winners. I sort of have found over there's not. So,
I'm sure in later episodes we will talk about.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
Customers,
without a doubt.
The last place you want to be is at SAT or at District Court or Supreme Court.
Yeah,
you want to resolve these issues before you can.
Yeah,
get to that sort of position.
Oh yeah, we certainly will. It's almost as I said, there's just so much to talk about. I think we're going to be here for years doing this podcast, but we'll just let it lead wherever it goes. So after that, what led you?
So after that, I went back to Roofmark briefly. In the intervening period, they built a new factory. They had a new estate manager who'd brought in a lot of customers, but had somehow got rid of the customers that I'd brought in. So the group manager said, look, can you work with the new estate manager to bring back the old customers, which I did, but I was still thinking that something in building was probably better, and I was, I wasn't the manager of the business, and indeed I was passed over as manager for the whole group at one stage as well, so I wasn't feeling the love necessarily from that group. So then I went to work for a shop fitting company who specialised in food shops and restaurants. I had 24 staff working for me. And somewhere in that period, yes, my wife saw an advert for building inspectors in the paper, and I didn't even see it. And so behind my back, she sent a resume into Mark Smith at House Specs. And I got a phone call from Mark And he said, "So, I hear you want to be a building inspector." And I said, "Excuse me, but who the hell are you?" And went in and had an interview with him and had a good chat. And I'd done a few inspections on the side for mates, but never formally and never charged for it. But Mark was interested in my experience and my services, and so I started working part-time. So it was 1999. Started working part-time for Housespec. Yep. And then, in the meantime, I was running this shop fitting business, and I'd run that for about 18 months. And there's a big difference between being a manager and being a practitioner, and managing people and managing a business is a different kettle of fish. And it's something that I can do, but it's not necessarily something that I love to do. And I was really enjoying the inspection work. So the opportunity came. Eventually I said to Mark, "Look, I want to go full-time inspecting for you. I'm going to leave my job." And he said, no, don't do that. and I said, "Well, look, you look after George, who is his full-time inspector. Make sure he's full. I'll take whatever comes after that." Within 12 months, we were putting on another full-time inspector. So It's one of those things that, once you start the work, and the word of mouth then doubles and spreads. And so by 2003, I was full-time inspecting. Okay. So I've been inspecting nearly 20 years.
So, I've got to ask the question. The wife, put in that resume, happy wife, happy life. Was it more that led you down and been there for so many years?
She could see that I was unhappy. Yeah. She could see that I was unhappy in what I was doing.
Yeah.
And she recognised the opportunity. She saw it. So, full credit to her.
No, excellent.
And ever since then I've helped build the Housespec business. I was the first Housespec franchisee. But there again, circumstances came to bear where I decided not to renew my franchise and decided, I had kids had finished at school. I had no more school fees, so I thought, right, I'll take this opportunity to go out on my own. So 7 years ago, I founded ABVC Building Inspectors. Yep. And 5 years ago, I started expanding that, and I now have 4 inspectors that work for me. And pretty much as possible, I try not to be on the inspection side. I'm trying to manage the business, but there's overflow of work. There are customers that I have, repeat customers that I have a soft spot for that, I still
like me
for, like you.
Like me.
Correct. So, and I think it's good to be in that position where I really enjoy what I do, and it's where you can see yourself make a difference, and where sometimes it's not just your knowledge, it's your personality or your ability to communicate with the builder, with all the parties really, that can help make these situations better for everybody.
Yeah. And I think that's an important point. It's about making it better. I know I had a friend say to me the other day, "Oh, Deb, what are you doing? You're taking on the industry." And, I said to her, "Well, if that's what you think I'm doing, you're so misinformed, because it's not about change. It's about just improving what's already there. And communication at the end of the day, and the way we speak to each other, the way we interact with each other, is a big part of that." And you'd see that in the inspections and
communication and education. It's there's a big scope for education of trades, of builders, of clients. There's so many. When you're looking at the train wreck of some of the things that can happen, it's easy to see that it's usually education that is the thing that's missing. It's somebody didn't. They were doing things that they didn't know to do. There was subcontractors taking a new product and applying the rules that they'd had for using other similar products, but not actually following the manufacturer's recommendations as to what should happen.
Yeah,
that happens regularly.
Yeah,
and I mean, we're still suffering the legacy in WA. There's 200,000 houses out there. If you've got a metal roofed house, you need to make sure it's tied down properly. Because basically all the roofs, there was a building code change, sorry, not a building code change, there was an Australian standard change in 1992, which introduced some extra regulations, which was missed by industry. And there was further changes in 1999. It wasn't until about 2010 that the Building Commission said, hang on a minute, we've got roofs blowing off down in Shoalwater. There was about 30 in one day that came off.
Yeah.
So 2014 they went through and surveyed the industry, and they found that only 30% of the roofs that were being built in 2014 were correct. 70%,
big number, isn't it?
70% were wrong or missing bits and pieces. Yeah. So they started their education campaign to really work on the builders and work with builders, but also work with the roof carpenters to make sure that that sort of aspect of the business was being worked on. The education was going in. But I can see the simple practicality of it too, that back in 1999, to buy an Australian standard, particularly the timber framing code, was probably $200.
Yes.
$200 in 1999. It was a lot of money. So the roof carpenter themselves weren't buying it and they weren't reading it, and the builders themselves weren't buying it and weren't reading it. So it's just that huge gap in knowledge. Whereas now we're coming along and we're saying, no, that's missing. It's only because building inspection has grown in popularity and grown in numbers of inspectors that you have more houses being inspected and picking up on these sorts of issues.
Yeah. So going back to the Australian standards, because it's a little bit of a... Everybody knows there is an Australian standard, but the advantage I suppose I have of talking to professionals is, and for the listeners, is I'm a homeowner. So I can guarantee you along the way that every homeowner or anybody listening to these podcasts is going to hear me ask dumb questions. And I'm actually really okay with asking dumb questions, because I've been in meetings where people have sat there and they've kind of not understood a single thing that's going on, but someone then finally asks a dumb question and it gets answered. So back to the Australian standards. The Australian standard is a guideline. Is that correct?
No. The Australian standards do come into play as part of the hierarchy of things that the builder should be governed by. Certainly there are some standards which, let's go back 3 steps.
Yep.
The top of the food chain in the hierarchy is the National Construction Code. Okay. So we have what's called the NCC, and the latest edition of that is 2019. It's due for review next year. There'll be 2022 will be the new issue. And inside that, so that lays out the basic guidelines of houses shouldn't leak, houses should be strong enough to withstand various forces, houses shouldn't burn down, houses should, and it goes to the other extreme of, houses should be able to resist snow loads and cyclones and all those sorts of things. Yep. And in that standard, it names, in the code, it names Australian standards as being the minimum standard. And that's, yes, unfortunately, it is the minimum standard. It's not the desirable standard. Yeah. So when you're comparing the Australian standard to what's actually being constructed on site, it's not best practice at all. It is, what can we put up with? What is the absolute minimum standard that we can insist that the builders work to, and then go from there.
Okay. And I have a bit of a theory on this minimum standards and why we're seeing more minimum standards rather than, and, we're not going to get into, the performance solutions and those kind of conversations today. Yeah. But are we seeing this, push to the minimum standard because of cost? Because, it's, homeowners go from builder to builder to builder trying to get the best price. The builder still has to make his margins. He still needs to pay his contractors. There's, this whole chain of people that need to be paid. and it's really quite money driven, you know, is
Yes.
sort of pushing down to those minimum standards. Is it cost cutting? Is it, you know, just it's easy to work with? What's your feel on it?
There is a money component to it, but I think it's what we were talking about with education. It's for a builder to be able to lay out the standard that he's expecting. It's written down in the Australian standards. You know, it's been the simplest way of describing what should happen as an absolute minimum. To go above and beyond that, that's where things like TAFEs would come in for the trades, to learn that you can go above that minimum standard. But there are so many people entering the industry. I mean, I remember when I was a builder, my best bricklayer was actually a chef, and he didn't have any. He had formal chef training, but he didn't have formal bricklayer training. He'd worked with a team for 5 or 6 years and got to know the industry and got to know what was expected. You put that out. I mean, you wouldn't find that amongst the licensed trades. You know, plumber and electrician, and to a certain extent painter. But all the unregistered trades, plastering, roof carpentry, bricklaying, all of those trades, general carpentry, they can have some TAFE training, but they don't have to have that to enter into the workforce. And particularly in these times, these boom times, you are getting unskilled people coming in and saying that they can do these things.
Yeah.
You're also getting people that, for example, a lot of the bricklaying teams are now fragmenting because the bricklaying price has gone up. You'll get guys that normally would have 5 or 6 years training in a team before they call themselves or are considered by their peers to be good bricklayers. They're now leaving those teams after 18 months, 2 years, and saying, hey, I can lay bricks and represent. The builder's not going to know any differently. It's not until it's actually going up, the work's actually going up, that they find out that these guys can't do what they say they can do.
Yeah.
But the attraction there is the money.
Yeah. But are we seeing a bit of a decline of, you know, kids leaving school and not wanting to go into the trades as well, because, you know, they've got so many other options? You know, back in the, 30 years ago, you either went to university or you went out and did a trade. You know, now kids have got so many other opportunities in electronics, in, IT stuff, and, are we seeing a decline of them coming into the trades as well?
Yes, we are. Yeah, there's definitely a lack of, there's a lack of people to train. There's higher costs of training, and I suppose we're seeing reducing numbers of skilled tradesmen able to teach these people as well. It's that's why the immigration policy is I think is quite important. You know, we still need to see skilled migrants coming across, because we need to plug those gaps.
Yeah.
And there again, that will come down to have cost pressures. You know, if you're the only brickie in town, you're going to be charging a lot of money, whereas if you're competing against 3 or 4 or 5 other guys, then your prices are going to be moderated. Having said that too, the trade prices haven't moved much in 20 years. And that I find to be, it's interesting. It's I think maybe that's not an attraction for young people. You know, back in the day, certainly electrician and plumber are still well recognised today as being a well-paying trade.
Yeah.
But plasterers, for example, when I stopped paying plasterers, I was paying $7 a square metre for float and $7 for set. So $14 a square metre for the finished product. Today they're being paid about $18. So in 20 years it's moved $4.
Yeah. That's not a good. That's not a good rate. That's not encouraging at all, is it?
It's not encouraging, and what that does is that puts pressure back onto the guys. Really have to put more plaster on the wall in a given day to make the same amount of money. to counteract inflation.
Yeah.
So that's why at the same time as we've had defects in roofing, we've also seen huge defects in plastering. The last I would say 20 years. The mixed proportions of the plaster have changed for the guys so that they can apply it faster. It's not. I don't think it's been a cost issue necessarily. That adjusting the mix. When they're doing the set plastering, they are mixing lime putty with hardwall plaster. And they're supposed to be 65-35 sort of mix. 65% hardwall plaster. Well, a lot of the product that we see, certainly up to about 3 years ago, was 65% lime putty, and that was because the guys it was more workable. Like the guys could get more square metres on in a given day.
Yeah.
So I cannot. And at the end of the day, they weren't being second guessed by the builders. The builders, certainly in the project home market, were doing very little painting of the walls.
Yep.
So the homeowner's doing the painting. The homeowner has no idea about the quality of the plastering.
No.
It's not until they actually, they either paint it and they find that it's chips off, or they put blue tack on the wall and big chunks will peel off. Those sorts of things shouldn't be happening. They're going around with a vacuum cleaner and knocking chunks out of the wall because
it's really powdery, isn't it?
Yeah.
And just for those listening, because if you are a homeowner and you're listening, when we talk about white set, we're talking about a 2-bag mix, isn't it? It used to be that you'd mix 2 bags together, that would go on. Now we're seeing a move towards a 1-bag mix to try and eliminate that softness of the plaster and plaster problems.
Correct.
So, I'm kind of really conscious that homeowners that are listening won't have that background and that knowledge and that technical knowledge. In saying that, does a homeowner need to know that level of information? It's kind of like, you want to know that what's going on the wall, what to look for, but at the same time you don't want to be learning how to do it, if that made any sense at all.
And obviously homeowners themselves are caught between cost implications. For some young people, they can't think about employing a painter to do the work. If they were using a registered painter, then the painter would check the walls before he started, and the paint, if he wasn't happy with the surface, then he would go back to the owners and say, listen, you need to talk to your builder about the surface because it's not up to scratch and I can't paint it. Whereas the homeowner who's not using a registered painter and is thinking about doing it themselves, they have no idea. They see the wall and they can rub their hand over it, and yes, it will take paint, but they'll pretty soon find out in the next sort of 12 months, the wear and tear on the walls will be far more than what it should be.
Yeah.
And there again, for the people who are listening now and the people who are building now, most of the builders have moved to different products. Some of them have moved to plasterboard, and they're just saying, blow it, we're just going to put plasterboard on the walls.
Yep.
Some of the builders are using 1-bag mixes of various sources. There again, some of those are good for West Australian conditions. Some of them are not quite as good, and anecdotally there are problems out there with some of them. A small proportion, but I suppose that's where the building inspection can help. In that, at least where we would be starting to look at those issues, hardness, flatness, that sort of thing at the lock-up stage, not looking at practical completion stage. It's far easier thing for the builder to think about having to redo some of the walls if they're not up to scratch, then
rather than at the end.
Or rather than being dragged through SAT. A couple have famously been dragged through SAT. They've had to then, put the people up in a hotel for a month, take out all their furniture, take up all the carpets, remove all the cornices, scrape off all the walls, replaster, put it all back again. Just nightmare sort of scenarios. $70,000-$80,000 at a time per house. So that's why the builders, being risk averse, have moved to different products to try and circumvent that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that everything that we see in building is a man-made product. And, you know, things are going to go wrong. There's going to be things that happen that weren't predicted. It's really important that people ask the question, you know, at the time, you know, not be afraid. And I think there's, you know, I've done a big study over the last 4 years into all the various parties of building and, you know, the builder, the homeowner, the trades, you know, so I've got all that to bring. But I think a lot of it is people are afraid to ask, afraid of, you know, looking, is that a silly question? The builder knows. This is a common one. The builder knows what they're doing, so I shouldn't ask.
Yes.
But then what happens is, you know, we get down the line. But I would argue on the other side, the builder is afraid to sort of be seen to be making a mistake. So, you know, if I was to say anything to the homeowner, I'd say ask the questions, and if I was to say anything about the builder, I'd say drop the ego there. It's okay to not get it perfect. You know, even though they're being paid for a product and a service, it's okay to you know, be vulnerable, to say, oh, you know, well, you know, yes, thank you for bringing that to our attention. We'll look at it, and you know, this is all that communication that we talked about. So yeah,
well, sometimes it's just sheer oversight on the part of the builder. I famously remember standing at a practical completion in Alexander Heights, and as part of practical completion, like I don't compare the house to the entire plans, because by the time you got to practical completion, if a window is slightly out of position, well, tough luck basically. It's, you know, you did have an opportunity all the way through the build to check it, but I do like to look at the front elevation to make sure that the house you thought you were going to get and move into is the same.
Yeah.
Anyway, over the top of the garage, there was supposed to be a keystone. It's a rendered feature that looks like a block that's sticking out of the wall in the middle of the garage. You know, it was clearly on the plan. And when I pointed out, I had the supervisor on my left and I had the owner on my right. And
meat in the sandwich, boom.
And I just pointed out, well, where's the keystone? And the reaction of the supervisor was, he turned to the owner and he said, John, I am very disappointed in you. Why didn't you point that out to me? I could have had that fixed ready for today. And he hadn't dragged the plan out. I don't know why they not put the keystone in, but it was clearly very embarrassing for the builder. You know, they didn't want to have these sorts of hiccups. They thought they were doing the right thing. But yes,
things do happen.
Things do happen.
They do.
Yeah, and usually it's funny. Usually a client will say, you know, I thought that was being painted green and it's now blue. Yeah. You know, it's why is that? Yeah. You know, it's not. They're not having a ping. They're not trying to expose the builder's incompetence. They're just asking the dumb question. Well, how did I end up with this like it is? Yeah. And then it's, I think the builders could take it down a notch too, to get on the defensive and get their hackles up and go in.
Oh, look, I think it's around the board. I think, you know, the homeowner needs to understand their responsibility. You know, they need some education. They don't need to know how to build a house, but they do know up front. That section between signing contract, or, you know, going to visit a display home and signing contracts is whirlwind. You know, builders, we can talk about the communication there. The trades, you know, what I've seen over the last 4 years is sort of they're undervalued as well, because at the end of the day, they're the ones building the dream. Yes. So, you know, so we've got those, you know, as I said, can of worms, we just keep, you know, opening up. Getting back to building inspection though, because today I did get you in to talk about building inspection, and this is what happens when we get together. We start talking about all these other topics. But I'm really keen to talk about the building inspection and pull it back to that. The main reason being is having a building inspection and having those stage inspections is quite important. But the thing that concerns me most, because always thinking of the homeowner, is there are a lot of building inspectors out there. How do you choose a good one from a bad one? What's the measure? Is there what type of things are you looking for when you're picking your building inspector?
Well, I suppose, 15 years ago, I started getting interested in how do we regulate the inspectors out there, because that's the first problem, is that building inspection, while building itself is regulated, you have to, anything over 20,000 you have to use a registered builder to do the construction. But building inspection, your mum could be a building inspector. Anybody who hangs a shingle out as a building inspector can be a building inspector.
That's a bit of a worry, isn't it?
It is, and it's a worry for the consumer. It's also a worry for the builder, because what tends to happen is when those inspectors put out opinions on things, it worries the owners, but if they're grandstanding about issues as well, if they're not exaggerating issues, but if they're making them appear to be more important than they are, it undermines the trust of the customer in the builder, and it destroys that relationship.
Yeah.
And so it drifts on from there. If they're in early in the piece, then the homeowner is hypersensitive to anything that's going on, and then they can, the relationships tend to get worse.
Yeah.
Whereas, it's important to get, I suppose, a builder. It's important to get an inspector that is qualified, is a registered builder for a start.
Yeah.
Or if they're not a registered builder, I'd like to see them all as registered builders. If they're not a registered builder, someone that has experience in the design process but really hasn't experience in what's actually built out there on site. So the building surveyors are usually at the front end of the ship. They're usually looking at the plans. They know the bee's knees about the building code, the specifications, making sure that what's on paper, which then goes to the trades, is correct.
Yep.
Whereas we are at the other end, we're at the back end of the ship. We see the built form. We see how sometimes the plans surprisingly couldn't actually be built the way they're designed. So the builders have had to make adjustments to what's going on, and we can assess, okay, well, it's not exactly the same as what's on plan, but it still meets the intent of the design, and it still is safe, and it's still
deemed to satisfy. I think that's when deemed to satisfy comes in. Does it?
No. Deemed to satisfy stuff deemed to satisfy stuff is what is described in the National Construction Code as a minimum standard as well.
Okay.
No, you might be thinking of performance solutions, and even then, performance solutions are supposed to be proposed by the builder prior to building licence being issued. You can't. Builders do it. They'll make. I've had a few where the builders have made a clanger. They've got the roof at the wrong pitch, for example. They've got a metal roof, 3 degrees. They've used the wrong profile. Then it starts to leak, but then they'll try and talk to a friendly building surveyor to get them to say, in this particular circumstance, it's actually okay. No, it's not okay. Yeah, it is going to leak, and you're always going to have that problem. So you can't retrospectively apply performance solutions. They've got to be proposed up front. And if the building surveyor had any nous, they would be saying, no, we're not going to accept that as being what you're proposing to do as a solution.
Yeah.
So and I've completely lost track as to where we're going.
No, that's okay. And I've got to stop doing that, because the thing is, I hear something, I go, hang on, is that where that fits in?
Happy for you to drill down.
Yeah, and we will drill down on these topics, but we were talking about the, what to look for in a building inspector.
So number one, you should be looking for someone who has qualifications for a start.
Yep.
That's where we were going. So 5 years ago, like I'd been sending the Building Commission and back in the day the Builders Registration Board letters every 2 to 3 years saying, when are you going to register building inspectors? When are you going to register building inspectors? And because the building inspection profession wasn't huge, they didn't see the need for it. And because the building inspection profession wasn't huge and the numbers of customers they weren't servicing wasn't huge, the number of problems weren't huge as a percentage of the number of houses being built. Now, realistically, now that there's more inspectors and now more houses are getting inspected, there's more problems being identified. Those problems have always been there. It's just that there's now somebody trumpeting that those problems are there. Anyway, when I left Housespect, I had, and formed my own company, I had a bit of time to put some time into lobbying again the Building Commission, and once again I got knocked back by the Building Commission, and they said, no, we don't want to register them, we have no plans to register them, don't want to register them. I said, well, would you have any objections to us forming an association of inspectors that at least puts in a benchmark? So we established the building. A group of like-minded inspectors got together and we formed the Building Inspectors Association of WA.
Yep. And
the Building Inspectors Association is about personal excellence for building inspectors. So it's not an industry-wide body. It's just purely to make sure that if your inspector is a member of the BIA, then they're good at what they do.
Right.
And the slight qualification on that is some inspectors are good at all forms of inspection, so pre-purchase inspections, under construction, building commission, the whole gamut. Some of the inspectors in the BIA are good at just pre-purchase.
Yeah.
So just be careful when you're looking on the website.
We learned that lesson.
To make sure that you check out, what the association rates these people as being able to do.
Yeah.
But basically, in simple terms, all the guys had to be a registered builder. All of the guys had to have professional indemnity insurance. You'll be amazed at the number that don't. All of the guys had to abide by a code of ethics, and you'd be surprised at the number of building inspectors that give backhanders to various people in the industry for work, that receive backhanders from subcontractors for recommendations to do work, that do inspections with the anticipation that they'll get the work to do the rectification. So we put in place a code of conduct to stamp out those sorts of practices. And we also took a good look at the actual reports that were being written, and we compared them. So there is an Australian standard for inspection and reporting, and we put these people's reports against that standard and measured how good they were, and we wanted an 80% pass mark on that. So they don't have to have 100% compliance. I mean, even my own reports, the Australian standard says that the address of the customer has to be in the report. Well, for a pre-purchase inspection, that's the house they're leaving, not the house they're going to. So having their address in the report doesn't really mean much. So you won't find that in my reports. But yes, we as much as possible, we're trying to get members to mirror what the requirements of the Australian standard are.
Right.
So yes, using the BIA is a good way of starting.
Yeah. And just make sure that they read the website, read each person's
correct
bio, or what it is, because I know I learnt that we recommended, we sort of point people in that direction, and I had a homeowner sort of send me a report, and we were we got talking, and that's when we learnt ourselves about that the inspectors there have different levels that they can.
Yeah.
And I had to sort of make that phone call. I was like, yeah. And it wasn't a big issue. It was just like, it was an awareness that we needed as our company starting up as well. And it's there now, and now it's good. And as you were talking, I remember you gave me a checklist of,
yes.
And I'll get, I know where that is, and I'll get that up on our website, because as a document for homeowners, they can get it, they can go through that checklist and see what they need in an inspector.
Yeah, it's a valuable checklist both for people who are building, but also people who are buying as well. If you're buying an established home, you still need to go through the same process. And that's maybe the subject for a whole different podcast, the pitfalls of buying.
Well, it's on my agenda, buy or build. So,
but I suppose the takeaway from that process, though, is this exactly the same when you're building, is that there is no cooling off period. When you're signing a building contract, there is no cooling off period. Let me say that again. There is no cooling off period. So if you're not happy signing the contract, don't sign the bloody contract.
Yes.
Take it away. Ask for some time.
Yes. And same with, I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it. PPAs, preparation plans agreement. You know, I have a big topic coming up on that, because what we see is first of all, there's not a good understanding of what a PPA is. I think it's taken me 4 years to really drill down and understand it myself. So we're expecting homeowners to understand it within minutes of sitting with a salesperson and, you know, being sold to as well.
I don't think the sales guys know either.
No, well, there you go.
Well, put it this way, they're an agreement. Like most agreements, you sign them in the anticipation you'll never have to look at them again. You know, you want, in the ideal world, you sign the preparation of plans agreement, the plans are done, you like the plans, the price is good, you sign on the dotted line to build the house. There again, you get a contract. You know, the house is built to the right standard, it's built in the right time, it's not costing you any more, any variations that you wanted, ones that you initiated, you know, I've changed colour on the roof tiles, you sign the variation. You know, agreements ideally sit in the bottom drawer. It's only when you want to get them out and whack someone with them that you actually, everybody starts reading them. And it
usually happens at about week 4 or 5. I could pinpoint it. The point is that they're there. There's something that, you know, homeowners are going to come across. This is for the homeowners that are starting their building journey, and we just want to raise awareness around it. It's something, once you sign, there is an agreement there, and we just want people to be understanding what that agreement means. You know, do all your homework first, because people go, can I walk away from the agreement? Well, you know, there's all these other topics that it's endless.
Good luck, yeah.
It's endless. A bit like, you know, I keep making this analogy that it's that big dirty bucket of water sitting out back that's been sitting there for months, if not years. We've got to stick the hose in it and just run it until it runs clean, you know, and just, you know, it's awareness, it's education. You know, I've broken it down to 3 things: accountability, you know, expectation and communication. So if we can get those 3 things, and a little bit of caring for each other and building relationships apart from tearing them apart. So, you know, which we see a lot of. And, you know, for me personally, on a personal note, because of my journey, the next 12 to 18 months I see tough for everyone, you know, across the board. And I know, you know, there was a big fear of mine coming out and talking about these topics, because I do understand the pain of the builder as well as the homeowner as well as the trades. But, you know, because there's this toxic opinion of, you know, oh, the builder's this and this is what's happening in the industry, and coming out and saying, well, you know, we've got to start talking about it because it's not what it appears to be, is hard. It's tough. So
why do you think there's going to be pain?
I think there's going to be pain because first of all, we saw the grants come out, and that sort of led this boom, this booms. We already had problems within the industry as it was prior to the booms. Okay, so now we've got a whole lot of homeowners that aren't aware of what's going on. We've got the trade shortages. So really, what happened back with me in 2018 was it's a small model of what we need now. We need empathy. We need to communicate more effectively. And this goes for all parties involved in building. We need to be patient. We're going to need patience. What people signed up for was maybe an expectation of, in 12 months' time, we're going to move into this home. That's not going to happen. And I think for me, that emotional side of when you're confused, when you've got that conflict happening and you're not getting the right answers, it creates tension and stress, and managing that stress over the next 12 to 18 months. So there's all that we've had, and as much as I hate talking about COVID, we're all sick of COVID, that lowered everyone's resilience in life. It affected people. And so, prior to COVID, they might have had a bit more resilience, but emotionally, so I'm all about sort of that, being assertive, having that emotional, intelligence, understanding how to, get answers, and also, the liaison officers in the building companies, they're doing the best they can as well, and they get a pile of questions and they don't have the answers. And I think from a homeowner's point of view, we get a little bit narrow-minded that we're the only person building and It's our only home. But there are, especially at the moment, thousands of people all suffering the same problems. The timber,
Kalbarri as well,
you've
damage that's got to be reconstructed up there as well.
So I think the model that we had back in 2018, which was my situation, which was really toxic to start off with. Once we sort of separated everybody's opinion and left everybody's opinion out of it, and it was just the builder and myself getting down to understanding each other and communicating better and speaking and really seek to understand each other, that's when amazing things really happened. And I know recently I was actually at that company doing a facilitation, and it was just amazing, because back then everybody, and this was one of the hardest things for me, Andrew, was at the time, it wasn't about, the world sort of, were behind me, but they're like, take them for everything they've got, do this, do that, this is what you need to do, you need to take them to court. And I didn't want that, because I understood that not only was I hurting, there was a company hurting as well. A mistake happened, and mistakes do happen. And reputation, which has taken a long time to build. And I'm fortunate. I haven't got a confidentiality over me, but I certainly do take it from a helicopter view of what I went through, but also what that company went through. And they made massive of changes, amazing changes within their company. And I think it goes back to everybody's why, isn't it? Why do we do what we do? So, but anyway, a bit of a side tangent there. I think everybody just needs to, Perth Building Shelter was set up for one core reason, as far as I was concerned. And that was, when I was going through it, there was nowhere really to turn. Yeah. And I want people to have somewhere to turn to. And we might not always have the answers, but what I do have, and what the company has, is a good network of people where we can find the answers and give the right information, rather than being left alone trying to find the answers themselves. And the one thing I give a personal guarantee with is, if I can't find that answer, I'm going to stay with you until we do. We're not going to pass you from department to department to department until it's found. So, it's interesting. It's a pressure cooker time is what I see, and I don't want it blowing up, to be honest. I would like to be getting out there and and helping people across the board, do that. So, yeah. That's my take on it. What's your take on it?
Well, I wonder whether you were purely looking at the trade shortages angle, which means that you're inevitably going to get people entering the industry that don't have the same skill levels, or whether you were looking at it from the anticipation side that, hey, people signing in December, their slabs are only going down in August. Yeah. I can only imagine the angst of waiting for the slab to go down and all that time you're building the expectation this is going to be fantastic when it finally happens, and then if anything goes wrong, emotionally it's a train wreck. It's like, oh crap, I waited all this long and now this has gone wrong, and how do we fix it? So
yeah, I think it's there's a load of things. The things that keep me awake at night is how do we improve this? How do we help people? How do we keep the situation calm? I was watching the news the other day. It's funny because I've never been into politics. I've never really been into watching the news, and suddenly, I need to be up to date with all these topics. But it was really interesting. I was watching, and I can't remember who it was now, but they were talking about the trade shortages, and they were talking about the solutions, because I'm all about solutions as well. And they were talking about the solutions, but they were talking about reducing the trade
qualification times.
Yeah, and I was like, please don't, please don't. I was like the football match, screaming at the TV going, please don't do that. And I understand recognised prior learning was part of that, the look of that, but it scares me when I hear things like that, because we already had a broken system in my eyes, or a suffering, one under strain. And again, part of what we're doing, I see as really beneficial also because of that system, going to building commission and all that. We're also, I guess, in many ways triaging and building the relationship between homeowner and builder again to resolve their issues so it doesn't have to go down that. But what keeps me awake is, this is also putting pressure on the mental health system, because, the financial system, because it's endless. So I'm quite passionate about finding this solution. But, the one thing I know also is I can't do it alone. People like you out there, I know today, you sort of came to me and you said, you've seen this guy, he's sort of doing something similar. And I said, great, because the more people out there raising this awareness and helping bridge those gaps, we're only going to improve what we're seeing. So,
well, it's always been a profound disappointment for me that, I don't know how many practical completions I've done, but it would be probably 1,000, I suppose. Most of the people, I'd say 95% of them, would never build again.
Yeah,
that is really sad. For me as a professional in the industry, it should be about repeat customers. It should be about had a good experience, got some value out of it, been able to sell the property, now I can move on and I want to do it again. Yeah. Not, bloody hell, that was a mission. I'm never doing that again. Yeah. And that's, for so many people, that has been the experience over the last 20 years. It's very sad.
Do you think there's pressure on the builder there to get a repeat customer? Because you and I know what happens at trade level. Again, this is something, we choose this builder with an expectation, but really it's the trades building the house, and we don't know where those trades are coming from. So you might have a fantastic build the first time with a builder, and we're talking probably the project builders, but you might have an absolutely fantastic build the first time. So then you go, oh, great, I'm going to do it again. And you have an absolute crap experience because of what's happening on the trade levels, of the inexperience and things like that. Is there pressure on the builders in regards to that, to be getting those repeat customers and having to meet that expectation every time? Or
to be honest, I don't think they see that opportunity. I don't think they're mining their old customers for new business. Okay. I think a lot of the time they're just going, likewise, they're saying, "Oh, great, glad that one's finished.
Yeah.
Move on to the next one." It certainly happens. I mean, higher up the food chain, the multiplexes and civil and civics and land lease, the pro builds of this world are seeking to establish relationships with clients because they want to be working with, for example, Bankwest. If Bankwest is building in Melbourne, they want to be doing the one in Sydney, and they want to be doing the one in Brisbane. They want to be managing that relationship. Whereas, I think they would all like to be having repeat customers, but I just don't, because the system is so fraught with so many missteps in the road, and because I suppose maybe at that commercial level you have a different type of customer, you have a more educated customer, you also have the resources of the building company to get round the customer. I mean, I remember when I worked at Land Lease, we would be sitting down once a month with the customer, telling them where we'd got up to, what the problems were that we were having, this trade, is in short supply, or, hey, we're having to redesign your air conditioning system because there's a shortage of this or whatever. But the customer, it was in a 18-month build, there was 18 opportunities to sit around the table with the client and let them know what was going on. And that doesn't really happen in the residential market, purely from a financial sort of side. There's not the resources for the customer liaison person or the supervisor to once a month sit down with the customer. I mean, if they did, it would probably be great. But I think there's a fallacy amongst the project home builders that is that the cheaper they get the price, the more houses they will sell. And I think that's a fallacy.
Yeah, I agree 100% with you. I do
whether
too.
Whether the house is 200,000 or 300,000, I think you'd still be selling exactly the same number. And realistically too, sometimes you're pushing your customer into financial positions that they're not equipped to deal with, and and maybe they're ending up with a product that they didn't really want, or it's bigger than what they wanted, or there's too many. I think if you start with the premise that it's all about price, then everybody is the loser. It's got to be, no, we're building it for a reasonable price, and it's a reasonable price because I'm paying a reasonable amount to this guy for doing this, and this guy for doing this, and this guy for doing this, and they're not cutting the guts out of it. The value is actually going back into the product. Yeah,
and this is a big one for me because, first of all, homeowner doesn't understand. Again, it goes back to, are the homeowners, are the consumer driving that price down? By doing so, we're getting less of a product. But it comes back also to the builders being confident enough in who they are as a company to have those transparent conversations. Like, okay, this product that you're looking at has, I dread to say it, the 75 mil slab, we've done it for price, but, our Australian standards are between 85 and 100. But I also see that side, do the consumers see that as an upsell? Do they see, as a push to spend more money? And, if we can drill back to being about the product, let's get back to talking about the product. And, I can't change, improve what's happening on the building side. They can all sit in a meeting and say, okay, let's just do this benchmark. And this is, that's what the Australian standard's about. Let's just stick to it and let's stop worrying. I know they've got to worry about margins and, their costs and everything like that. But as you said, let's shift away from it being about the money and let's start caring. I think over the 4 years, I can't even begin to tell you how many homeowners I've spoken to, Andrew, and all of them say the same thing. I hear the same line every single time. I just want them to care. And it's not that they don't care, it's just that they care about their reputation, potentially their company. They've got a whole pile of people that they've got to think about. But at the root of it, I think they do care. I believe they care.
I think probably, at various levels. Well, I think people are conscientious about their jobs, but they're being measured in different ways.
The metrics are all out, aren't they?
People don't realise that the supervisors are measured on performance. They're not measured on problems, shall we say. Just describing how they're measured, they work on a point system basically, and they might be working on 30 houses, and they might get 2 points for the tiler being finished, and 5 points for the bricklayer being finished, and 1 point for the painter being finished. So their construction manager will drive around all the sites, and he'll measure what stage all those jobs are up to, and the supervisor gets so many points from all of his jobs, and then they operate within a band. And so if they've got less than the right number of points, then the supervisor gets the sack. And if they're above the minimum and below a certain amount, then they're judged to be doing their job properly. And if they're consistently travelling above that, then they get paid a bonus because they're achieving better production than everybody else.
Right.
But it has nothing to do with quality. It has nothing to do with problems. So if there is a problem on site, probably the person who wants to know about it the least is your supervisor, because it's going to slow him down and it's going to affect his points. And at the end of the day, it might affect his job prospects. So if he can get by hiding the problem,
or looking away,
or not finding it, not looking for it, then he may well do that because there's no incentive for him to do that.
Yeah.
Now, some of the innovative builders around town, there's one I'm thinking of, did put a bonus scheme in for their supervisors, and they have their own internal. They engage independent building inspectors to come and work for the builder, and they might be building 500 houses in a year, and over the course of a year, what they were doing is they were measuring at the practical completion inspection, so that the independent guy would go in 2 or 3 days before the owners would go in to do their practical completion, and they had a cumulative tally of how many, the supervisor might have finished 50 houses in a year, all of them across, there's 6 or 7 supervisors, and they'd have a bit of a competition as to who would have the least number of items at practical completion. And whoever got the least got a $5,000 bonus. So it was, in that sort of circumstance, it was worthwhile for the supervisor to think about preventing problems as well as getting production. And
so that practical completion, though, is a lot of finishing trades. So were they, the structure, the roof carpentry and things like that, were they able to identify?
No, they wouldn't have been looking at those. No, but they would make sure that they would weed out their painters, their tilers, their plasterers, their cabinet makers to make sure that they were really good, so that when they came to practical completion, those issues look really good. And they had...
We almost need to take that a step back, have a bonus system for the structural side of...
True.
Side of it.
True.
So because the finishing trades, I mean, it's all nice to have a house that's all smick and perfect and...
Looks nice.
Looks nice. Bells and whistles, and then, 2 years down the track have got cracks in ceilings and that, or, roof blowing off because it hasn't got tie downs.
Cyclone goes through like Calbarry, and the tie down's not right.
Yeah. So, look, it is endless. The site supervisors, just before we finish up, but the site supervisors, are they spread too thin? Is they've got too many homes, and
there's sort of an agreed benchmark that 25 single-storey houses is probably about the limit for getting that mix of production and quality. It could vary maybe up to 30, but and ideally probably down to 20 would be even better.
Yep.
But about 25 houses. I suppose it depends on economics as well. 3-4 years ago, when the market was down and the builders were shedding supervisors, they'd still retain their good supervisors, but the poor old supervisor, one builder I'm thinking of, he was doing from Hillary's to Chidlow, and all points north, so Yanchep and he had 40 houses on the go, 40 two-storey houses on the go. It's just, so he would get to each house once a fortnight. It's just the logistics weren't quite right.
Yeah.
So,
and I know there's one company that I know of for sure that have sort of changed that somewhat, where they're kind of, if you're living north, you kind of got that sector, and
absolutely.
They're looking at more that sort of.
Yes.
But yeah, it's endless, isn't it? We really like it.
And
I
don't think it's fair to, if you're walking in to buy a house, to start drilling the salesman about who exactly would be my supervisor, and then what trades has he got. I mean, when you're in the market, in that particular market, I describe it like going to Bunnings. You've got a job to do. You want an outcome. You go to Bunnings to buy a tool for that job. Yeah. And you might spend $50. You might spend $100. Sometimes the $100 tool actually does only 75% of the job, and the $50 tool may do 95% or may even do 100% of the job that you want it to do. The unfortunate part for the homeowner is until you actually go and buy the tool and take it home and use it, you're not going to find out.
No.
So,
no, that's right.
There's just so many variables in this building industry. So I would caution people thinking about buying not to get paranoid about the whole thing, because there's just too many variables. It's a matter of making sensible decisions, and if something is too cheap, if you think something is too cheap, old story, it probably is too cheap, and there's probably something wrong with it.
I think it's about asking smart questions at the front end. And those smart questions are not who is my supervisor and what's their name and what's their phone number, because I'm going to research them and do the investigation on them before we start. I'm not talking about those questions. I'm talking about getting back to what the product's about. A simple tip for homeowners listening: if you are going into the market, when you walk around the display homes, put your hand on things and say, is this part of my package?
Yes.
That's something else that we see a lot of, people going in and thinking they're getting a product and then only getting to pre-start to find out they're not getting that product at all. So, it's all this. And, reach out to, us at Perth Building Shelter. We're happy to guide people. For me, it's about the intervention, about not getting to that place where you're in an argument with your builder over something. Getting a good inspector. I'll get that checklist up.
I was going to say, just rounding out that selection process discussion, after we formed the BIA, what we call the Building Inspectors Association, it became apparent that the Building Inspectors Association was going to be limited in numbers because there aren't a lot of guys out there. They might have the knowledge, but they can't write a decent report. But that the BIA wasn't there to promote building inspection as an industry. So yes, I got together with some other players in the industry, some of the bigger players in the industry, to talk about how can we advance building inspection as a profession, and that's where Inspect WA comes into the picture. Right. So for the consumer too, I don't want them to be confused about, yes, do I choose someone from the BIA? Do I choose someone from Inspect WA? I mean, Inspect WA has grown to become an umbrella organisation for all inspectors, and really it promotes two themes. Number one, building inspection is a good idea, and there should be more of it in all facets of building. And number two, we're trying to benchmark some of the quality aspects of what an inspector should be, so that you have some confidence when you go to an Inspect WA member that they're a registered builder, they carry insurance, or if they don't carry insurance, they will declare to you that they don't carry insurance, and that they abide by the code of ethics.
Yeah.
It has become less about the actual reporting, so you'll find a wide variety of reporting styles and skills, but it's more about how do we advance some of the industry-wide issues. How do we lobby the building commission to register building inspectors?
Yeah.
And apply pressure that way. How do we talk to the HIA collectively to try and improve the relationship between owners and builders?
Yeah.
So realistically, the BIA was never going to be able to do that because it just didn't represent enough of the building inspectors. Whereas Inspect WA represents 35 inspectors, and that's probably it's probably about 35% of the people that are out there.
Yeah.
So as a very start, when you're looking for a building inspector, you probably should be looking at an Inspect WA member for a start, because that there's going to be a minimum level of qualifications. And then if you've got a particular problem, if you've got a building commission complaint or something that's really detailed or really complex, then maybe you should be looking at a BIA member as well, because they may have a better technical knowledge, better technical grasp.
Yeah. I think the best thing we can do for consumers right now is actually get that document that you gave to me. I know it's up in our private group, but get that up on either our website or our Facebook, so that people can access it. Yeah. So if I've got your permission to do that.
Absolutely.
So I think it's got your labels all over it, but so just better check that.
I thought I made it fairly generic.
Yeah, it was, but I'm trying to remember now. But I'm obviously happy for it to go up. But I just thought maybe I need to get your permission first. So it's now on recording that I've got your permission.
As long as the audience now knows that building inspection is a completely deregulated market, anybody can hang their shingle out. So therefore, searching for the right building inspector is important. Maybe we've narrowed it down here today, but certainly by applying the criteria of that information brochure and asking those questions when you ring someone up. And inspection experience is another important thing. It does take probably 500 inspections before you're comfortable in your own skin about that's normal, rather than being... rather than being dramatic about things, is like, no, that is definitely wrong versus maybe it's wrong, maybe it's not. Yeah. So,
and the other difficult thing, I think, because we had a homeowner contact us probably about 6 months ago, and they were confused because the inspector was saying one thing and the builder was saying the other, and the homeowner was the meat and sandwich going, well, what do we do? And with that one, we actually took all the information from both parties, and behind me, and every time I open my mouth, or the knowledge that comes out of my mouth is the team that have taught me over the last 4 years. But we had a look at it as a whole, and then we just put a report back to the homeowner, but guided them to build the relationship, not to be pointing the finger at the builder, but just saying, look, this was, I think there was about 6 things that they weren't agreeing on, but there was only one that really needed to be addressed. And the builder did the right thing, and they kind of, and we're new too with what we're doing. So there's, who are these people with what we're doing? And, we spoke to the homeowner about that and said, look, if, you feel any resistance, that's not what we're about. We're about building the relationship. And they were fine, and we haven't heard from them since. So, it's that, it can be that easy. I think we overcomplicate things. But look, it's been great talking to you today, Andrew. And I've got a feeling you're going to be a regular for a while anyway. Because as I said, there's just so many elements to speak about. What do we speak about? What don't we speak about? Navigating through that. I think when it comes up organically, I think it's good for homeowners. I think it's good for all parties to be be listening to it. But I appreciate your time today, and thank you very much. I even learnt some things today. Go figure. I'm always learning. Been a pleasure. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we round up?
No, I think, there's certainly other topics that we can branch into. Rounding out that discussion on Australian standards, construction code, manufacturers' requirements, performance provisions, even the new WA standards and tolerances guide. Where do they all play a part in how the work's assessed? Those, we'll do an hour on that. Just that.
Just that, absolutely.
And then we can start talking about, just plastering or just roof carpentry, or there's just so many facets to it. Yeah,
and I've got a whole pile of trades that are, willing to come in and have a discussion about it, and an open discussion, about the different things. And, people that have been in the industry for years, and they've seen the progression, they've seen, where things are sort of going a little bit pear-shaped. But I think the biggest message is that this is all about solutions. If you are a homeowner currently in the situation where you're starting to feel frustrated and stressed, reach out to us. There's lots of guidance, there's lots of team players that we're associated with that will help guide and things like that. And your experience, the knowledge that you bring, and all the other experts that we've got lined up to come on in, we'll certainly we've got to start somewhere. It's about getting it started, isn't it? It's not about getting right, it's about getting it started. So, and that's what we're doing here today. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
The information and opinions presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on it should not be without seeking professional advice. Perth Building Shelter does not endorse, approve, recommend or certify any information, product, process, service or organisation presented or mentioned in this podcast unless stated otherwise. Perth Building Shelter disclaims all liability for any loss arising out of any individual's use of or reliance on the information presented in the podcast.